Hi, welcome to my podcast, Reclaim. I am your host, Thaís Sky. I have supported women navigate the complexities of being human for over 10 years. This podcast is where I disseminate some of those learnings and offer thoughts and guests to guide you into your healing. Welcome. Hello. Thaís here. Welcome to Reclaim. I want to talk to you all today about navigating needs within relationships. Now, I will be speaking particularly to intimate partnerships, but really this can be applied to relationships with parents, friends, colleagues, coworkers, boss. It just is a different level of context, but it can be applied and needs to be thought of and applied in those contexts because we most likely have needs in those areas too. And I think there's not enough conversation about the complexities of the interpersonal dynamic of needs. I think we often see conversations about needs being about specific individual needs, like I need this. But then how do we bring that into relationships? How do we talk about it and think about it in terms of the people in our lives? That's kind of what I want to dig into today. And so first, in order to have this conversation, I want to share something that I wrote on Instagram to start us off because I think it's really important for us to be keeping in mind. And that is that not every relational issue can or should be fixed with a conversation about boundaries or needs. The reason why I wrote this, and I think it's important for us to keep in mind, is that there's so many wonderful conversations around the world, happening online about the importance of navigating needs and boundaries, like the conversation we're about to have right now. And sometimes I worry that because we place so much emphasis on these two things, that we run the risk of kind of making everybody think that at the core of all relational issues are issues about boundaries and our needs. But the truth is, relationships are complicated and relational issues are wide and varied. And as such, unfortunately, many of them can't be readily fixed with a conversation about boundaries or needs, right? Like there's so much that happens in relationships. I mean, we can talk about how relationships are a projection of childhood wounds. We can think about relationships in terms of recreating trauma, right? The repetition of trauma. We can talk about family systems and how we tend to get into relationships with people that have similar level of differentiation from their families. And I know I'm throwing big words around, but I'm just saying that there's so many ways that we can look at and think about relational dynamics and what is going on between two people. And I think we can oversimplify something that's really complex by giving the impression that all conversations ultimately are about needs. So that's not to say that boundaries and needs are not important. In fact, obviously, they're healthy. They're critical to healthy relating. I guess I'm just trying to add a little bit more nuance to this topic and remind all of us that you're not doing relationships wrong if the relational issue can't be resolved with a conversation about boundaries or needs. It simply means that there are no quick fixes to complicated dynamics that occurs when two humans come together. And this is surprisingly a good thing. It invites us to keep in mind that coming into challenges with an open mind and an open heart and a loose idea of what you need is so much more important than demanding others to change based on what we think they need to be in order for us to be happy. I'm going to dive a little bit more into that later. Okay, so that's kind of the caveat for this conversation. Yes, we're going to dive into needs and relationships, but I am by no means saying that all relational dynamics can be fixed by a conversation of needs. I think this is a place to start, but not an end-all be-all. This is just one facet of a complicated system, but a facet that I think is obviously quite important, or I wouldn't be having a podcast episode on it, nor would I write so much about it. But needs are a whole thing. And the needs that I'm kind of obviously referring to here are emotional needs. Needs to be loved and supported and cared for. I'm not necessarily talking about kind of like physical needs or Any other type of needs, though, I guess they could fall under the umbrella of emotional needs if we're talking about it in relationship. But I think we have to start by just naming how important knowing our needs are and how important having needs is. Can you imagine that I'm having to have that conversation? I'm having to say that. I think it's so sad how often, particularly those of us with big worthiness wounds and those of us that identify as people pleasers, or those of us who have learned to prioritize other people over us, we've kind of been taught that our needs are important. We've been taught this through our childhood. We've been taught this through the ways that we navigated relationships. And now this is where many of us are, in a place where we believe our needs are not important. And that our needs will get met if we prioritize the needs of others. If we focus on getting other people's needs met, then somehow in there, they will now meet our needs, or they will now think about us, or they will now, etc. And there is something true to the fact that, being thoughtful of other people's needs is part of relationshiping. But the fallacy is, I don't have to think about my needs. I just have to focus on their needs, and then somehow they will be able to know what I need, right? They'll be able to mind read, just like I mind read their needs. I anticipate their needs, therefore they'll be able to anticipate my needs. And so this dynamic, which usually stems from childhood, leads us to believe that our lovability is connected to how well we can mind read, how well we can anticipate. If anticipating guaranteed that we would be loved or safe or taken care of, then of course we're going to keep doing that now. We're going to keep anticipating other people's needs, hoping that then they can mind read and know our needs. And so in that weird, complicated dynamic, where we had to anticipate someone else's needs, we were not then usually taught how to learn or recognize our needs. Our developmental priority was in learning about other people's needs, which makes it super difficult now for us to know what the heck we need. It can be so hard for me to know what I need because I am so, I've been taught to be so self-sufficient. I've been taught to take care of myself. I've been taught that I can have my own back, that nobody else is really going to have my back, so I just better have my own back. And so it's very hard for me to know what I need. Very hard for me to put myself in a vulnerable position of then asking for that need. And then it's very hard to get rejected. So there's so many phases in getting our needs met. There's identifying our need, there's asking for our needs to be met, and then there's the letting go of the results, and then honoring how we're going to meet our own needs. There's a whole thing to it. And it can be the very first step of even just knowing what our needs are can be very, very difficult. And this is where so much of our own work comes in and requires attention and thoughtfulness, is to really begin to understand what it is that we need. How can we be in touch with our internal experience, what we're emotionally craving, what we are longing for, what we are asking when we're asking people to spend time with us? Like oftentimes we think of like love languages as a way to kind of put literal language to our needs. And I think it's like a pretty decent model, right? That if you think about the 5 love languages, which if you're not familiar with the 5 love languages, I don't even really know who, it was a book and I don't know who wrote the book, but he wrote about the ways in which we receive love, and he spoke about 5 of them. Let's see if I can even name it. There's quality time, there's physical touch, there's acts of service, there's receiving gifts, and there's one more. Oh, words of affirmation. Boom, look at me go. And I often like to think of love languages and like what we want now is like what we didn't get enough of as a child. Sometimes that applies, sometimes it doesn't, but I like to think of it that way because then that helps me make sense of it. Like, of course I want words of affirmation. I don't feel like I got enough of that, and now I crave that a lot. And so the 5 love languages can help us kind of put words to, I need more affirmation from you. I need more words of validation from you. And that can be useful. That can be helpful for us to start the inquiry of what is it that we really need. Because when we're asking what is it that we really need, it usually goes further than I need you to spend time with me. And it most likely is more connected to, I want to feel important in your life. I want to feel like you care. I want to feel like we are connected. Usually it has to do with connection. Usually it has to do with feeling heard, feeling like your presence matters to the other person. Those are usually the core needs that we're asking in relationships. Even let's say in the work environment, our needs typically are that we're feeling purposeful, right? That we're feeling like our work matters to not only our customers, for example, the shareholders or whatever, but to our boss, to our colleagues, that we feel like we're doing work that's being received, that's being seen. When we're talking about friendships, it's often that there's an equal give and take, right? Needs there usually have to do with feeling like what you're putting in is what you're getting out, that there's an equanimity there, that there's a balance there, that there's reciprocation there. That's a good word, reciprocation. So when we're thinking about needs in relationship, we want to go as deep as possible to what is it that we're really aching for? What is it that we're really longing for? What is it that we really want? Because there's usually a difference between needs and want. Want tends to stem around like a changed behavior. I want you to put the toilet seat down. That's a want. It's not a relational need. Relational need is more of an emotional language of I want to feel, I need to feel seen. I need to feel important. I want to feel, or I need to feel that this person cares about me. Why would we be in a relationship if that person didn't care about us, right? Okay. So to summarize, first, the most important thing when we're talking about conversations about needs, and particularly getting our needs met in relationships, is we have to have a general idea of our own relationship to needs, the pattern that we have with needs, and then start to learn how to tap into our own needs. As someone who comes from a background of eating disorders, I've learned very successfully to negate my physical needs. I can drive for hours without stopping to pee. I can literally starve myself because I'm too busy, quote unquote. And so learning how to grapple with my physical needs has been a whole thing, that like my body is actually needing attention. It needs support. It needs nourishment. And that tending to that need isn't a burden, but a gift. That this is the gift of living this life, is that I get to support and nourish my body. That is a need that my body has, that if I don't support, I will literally die, right? So learning how to understand how we've learned to negate our needs, how we've learned to dismiss our needs, how we've learned that if we don't pay attention to our needs, maybe somebody out there will. That's important for us to know. It's important for us to reflect on what is the relational need dynamic that's happening in my relationships right now. Do I often communicate, what's going on with me, or do I hope that people will just know? And this is a hard one, this mind reading, this hope that other people will be able to read our minds and anticipate what we want and need. And it's hard because in one way, it puts the responsibility off of us to knowing what we want and need. And there's something quite satisfying about not having to be responsible for our own needs. Like there's the fantasy, the wish that other people could be responsible for our needs. And this wish, this fantasy comes from a very grounded reality, which is that at one point in our development, at one point as a child, we our way of survival was by having our mothers or our caretakers read our minds. I mean, babies are one of the most vulnerable entities in the world. I mean, human babies are more vulnerable than any other animal babies in the world. We really, really depend on our caregivers to be able to anticipate our needs, to be able to meet our needs. And as they do that continuously, we start to learn our own internal world of our needs, and we start to be able to put language to it. We start to be able to identify it. We start to be able to communicate it. If that developmental process was broken in some kind of way, it may have then led us to think that, or to not outgrow the hope, the wish that other people would be able to mind read, that other people would be able to just know what it is that we need. But this becomes really dangerous, particularly in relationships, because this is where resentment grows. This is what the dynamic usually looks like. I'm anticipating your needs. I'm doing all these things, and you're not doing all these things for me. Now, the fallacy of this argument is that most likely our partner didn't ask us to do all this. Our partners didn't ask us to anticipate. Our partners, maybe subtly on an unconscious level, but oftentimes when I hear this dynamic happening in a couple that I'm working with, what I'm seeing is that they think that if they do this, their partners will be happy, but they're not actually asking their partners if that will be happy. If their partners even want that. And so they're going above and beyond to make their partners happy, and their partner didn't even ask for that. And then they get resentful that they're doing all this. But it's like there wasn't an agreement that this was the way that the partner wanted to be related to. So are we anticipating our partner's needs, doing above and beyond that our partners didn't even ask for, that they didn't even want, as a way to then us get our needs met, and as a way for us to maybe not have to name our needs, to not have to put our needs out there, to not have to ask that our needs to be met. Yeah, so that's a great place to start, to be really thinking about it. It's like, what is going on in the relationship? Because let me tell you what, pretending not to have needs isn't the answer. Like pretending that, you're fine, everything's fine, you're going with the flow, that there's no issues, you don't want anything, you don't need anything, like that isn't the answer. Being super accommodating and thoughtful and generous about not having needs isn't the answer to getting your needs met. Hopefully I've made that abundantly clear at this point. Yeah? Okay. So now that we're learning, okay, I need to learn what my needs are. I need to learn what it is that I'm really craving and what it is that's really here. The next step is to learn how to ask for it, to learn how to be in relationship with it. Because having needs is a whole relational dynamic. Understanding and relating to our needs is an important way that we relate to ourselves and to other people in the world. Now, I just want to pause here and, kind of name that you're allowed to feel ambivalent around getting your needs met, Ambivalent means to feel two ways about something, to have complex feelings around something. And of course, you're going to feel ambivalent about getting your needs met, particularly if, you never had them really met before. The experience of then having your need being met can feel really overwhelming, and actually it can feel quite dysregulating to our nervous system. This confusion is normal. It is normal. We do have to just keep going, right? And keep trying and keep asking for it. I had this experience once where there was a need that I was really hoping to be met by a friend. I really wanted a friend to hold me and to see me. And they did. They really held me and saw me. And instead of feeling full and supported like I thought I was going to feel, I actually felt panic. I felt so overwhelmed. I felt so dysregulated. I felt I couldn't even be in the same presence as them in that moment, because it felt so big. And so afterwards, when I reflected on that experience, I kind of came to a realization of course I felt overwhelmed. This is an experience that I never really got as a child. I had a very small container to hold such experience. If I think of having experiences as expanding a container, the more experiences you have, the bigger container you have to hold the complexities of that experience. when you don't have many internal experiences of something, it's going to feel very hard to hold it internally, to not reject it immediately. And it's so funny how we reject things, right? Someone gives us a compliment, and it's so out of our comfort zone to receive a compliment that we deny. Oh, they don't really know, right? Oh, they don't really know what it took, or oh, they don't really know us. They didn't really mean it. These are ways that we try to reject and deny a different experience than we've gotten before, because we don't have a way of knowing how to hold this compliment in our worldview. Our worldview is that we're not deserving of compliments. And so when we receive it, it's like, where do we put that experience? Where do we file that experience in the filing cabinet of our minds? When we don't have a folder for it, we just toss it. We reject it. It's so fascinating. I see this in my group program, Worthy Women Rise, so much, where, they're offered a different experience and they can't make sense of it. And so the only way they know how to make sense of it is through the lens of how they've made sense of everything else, which is generally to reject it, to minimize it, to deny it. And it exists within all of us. When we don't know what it's like to have some type of emotional need met, it can feel very dysregulating when it is met. And so sometimes, believe it or not, we self-sabotage. Well, I actually don't like the word self-sabotage. What I mean to say is we protect ourselves from that ambivalence. We protect ourselves from not knowing how to internalize that need. And we do this in many ways, by pretending that we don't have needs, by pushing the other person away, by never doing something again, right? Like in this instance that I'm sharing, like, what if I just never asked my friend to see me again, right? So there are ways that we try to protect ourselves from feeling really uncomfortable. And that's why it's so important for us to keep going, for us to notice the ambivalence, notice the ways that we're trying to actually not get our needs met, as a way to protect ourselves, while at the same time we so desperately want to get our needs met. Yes? Okay. How do we feel about that? Okay. But because we often don't know how to hold those ambivalent feelings, what gets elicited instead is shame. Oof, shame is such a doozy. Shame of having needs. Shame of getting asking for our needs to be met and having them be rejected. Shame of, what it means if a need isn't met, and what that means about the relationship. I mean, shame can be so pervasive and so difficult to tackle, because shame often feels like touching a hot stove. All we want to do is withdraw and push away and deny the shame and never feel shame again. Now, I've done a few episodes on shame. Shame is like a feeling just like any other feeling. And part of learning how to tolerate our internal world and navigating our needs and understanding our needs is also to be able to hold shame, and get curious about why that shame is being elicited and coming up for you. And really be in reflection about what may be underneath the shame. What could the shame be preventing you from feeling? Because shame is often, in some weird ways, easier to feel than other ambivalent feelings. Okay, so now the next kind of thing to be thinking about when it comes to needs is, before we can even go into a relationship and ask for needs from our partner, to be really thinking about, how do we meet our own needs, right? Because if we're expecting our partner to be able to meet our needs when we're not even meeting our needs, right? Asking them to prioritize us even though we're not prioritizing us, well, that's obviously not going to work. We need to be thinking about how to meet our own needs. Not, let me be very clear, not from a fuck everybody, I don't need anybody, I can be my own individual person, I can meet my own needs. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm suggesting and offering is that there are ways that we often try to get other people to prioritize us so that we don't have to prioritize us. And that's where things can get skewed. And that's where the invitation is, where are you meeting and prioritizing your own needs? Where are you saying my needs are important? How are you saying that through action? How are you declaring to yourself that you are worthy of meeting your own needs? that your worth, that your sense of presence, that your beingness is important, is valid, is honorable, and you are allowed to have needs, and you are allowed to have them met, and you are allowed to listen to your needs, and you're allowed to make decisions around your needs. Yes? Here's an example of this. Let's say that you are going hiking with a group of friends, okay? And you hurt your ankle on this hike. Pretty early on in the hike, you hurt your ankle. Now you're limping, you're in pain, and you don't really want to be doing this anymore. Like, this hike is not enjoyable to you. Here are a few options. You can ask your friends to meet your need. Like, I'm injured. Can you help me? Can you take me back, to the car? Can we stop this hike? Can we do something different here? I'm in a lot of pain. That's one option. Perfectly valid. Another thought is, I'm going to turn around. I'm going to go back. I'm in pain. Why don't you all go ahead? That's totally fine. You all go ahead. I'll meet you back in the car, and then maybe we can go to lunch afterwards. That's another option. The third option, the option that I think many of us choose, is I'm just going to go along because I don't want to be difficult, and I don't want to be the person who fucking turns around and why did my ankle get twisted? And I'm just going to suck it up, and I'm just going to keep going, and it doesn't matter what I want. And I don't want, my friends to judge me or to hate me for being the difficult one, and asking them to come back with me. So I'm just going to pretend that I don't want to turn around. I want to finish this hike. I don't even, right? We may not even have access to the parts of us that are wanting to turn around or the need, right? We may just be like, you know what? Never mind. I'm just going to keep going on this hike. This is what I want. I asked for this. I'm the one that put this group together. And I'll just be fine. I'll be fine. Everything's fine. Right? That's the option that I know is most familiar to me. It's very difficult to say, hey, actually, you all, I'm not feeling good, and I want to turn around, or I would like for us to turn around. It's hard to access that part of us. It takes a bravery to say, hey, this is hurting me. For so many of us, we're so much more likely to just deny that there's something here, to not complain, to just go with the flow. But when we're doing that, we're not prioritizing our own internal experience. We're not honoring the fact that we have limitations and that we're hurting and that our hurt deserves to be tended to, that we are worthy of prioritizing our own care. Prioritizing our own care doesn't necessarily mean that you demand that others take care of you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you ask the group to turn around, but it does mean that you're saying to yourself, this is important. I'm not just going to go with the flow because I need this. And then you have to decide which of the two options you want. Maybe you ask them and they say no, and then you go back to on your own anyway. Those instances we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. We'll talk about the asking part of it. I'm still very much inviting us to sit with how are we prioritizing and thinking about our needs. Are you asking someone to prioritize you even though you're not prioritizing you? Because that's not going to be sustainable. That's going to lead to resentment. That's going to lead to a continual fantasy that they are going to be able to take care of you in ways that your partner is not really supposed to. Your partner is not your parents. They're not supposed to be taking care of you the way a parent would take care of a child. You're now an adult, and it's time to step into an adult relationship with your partner. And that means letting go of the fantasy that somehow if you just deny your needs, they can mind read and they will take care of you and everything will be okay. It's just not a healthy way of relating. Part of prioritizing and reclaiming your needs means questioning whether or not your sense of self-worth is attached to whether or not your needs get met by others. Because if you're prioritizing your own needs, then whether or not your need gets met by another is not attached to your goodness, is not attached to your sense of worth, is not attached to your validity of the need. It is simply a reflection of what's happening maybe in the relationship and what's happening for the other person. But it can get very, very sticky when we're having ambivalent feelings around our needs, and then someone rejects our needs, for us to then go into a spiral of I'm not worthy, I'm bad, I'm not good enough, this is somehow my fault. And it's important for us to have an idea in the back of our mind that actually like having your needs rejected by the other doesn't really say anything about your sense of worth. It's not about it's not that you don't deserve to have needs met. It doesn't say anything about your goodness, your inherent value, your what am I trying to say? Your ability to exist in the world. Okay? We really, really want to work on detaching from that belief that somehow how our needs are received by others speaks to our goodness. It speaks to our sense of worth. It activates the worthiness. When we want to be mindful of that, because if our life is so shrouded by the worthiness wound and someone rejects our needs, we no longer get curious about what's happening in the relationship or what's happening with the other person. When we collapse within ourselves and just get so sticky and feel so unworthy, we can no longer get curious as to the complexity of what's happening here. And so that's the work, that's the work of my group in Worthy Women Rise. That's the work that we are invited to do, is cultivating our worthiness wound, or tending to and healing our worthiness wound, so that if our needs get rejected, we can tolerate that and we can be in curiosity and exploration of that, instead of thinking that it must means that there is something wrong about us. Yes? Okay. Another thing that's important when we're thinking about asking for our needs to be met is, are we talking about a need here that we want to decide and think about and be in relationship with another human? Or is asking for your needs to be met a disguise for demanding that that other person be different in order for you to feel loved? Because that is two totally different things. A demand and a conversation about needs are not the same thing. But I know it's so tempting to want to demand that others change in order for our needs to be met, when we have operated for so long from the sense that our lovability is connected to how well someone else can read our mind and can meet our needs. Yeah. So a demand is an energy. A demand is an entitlement. A demand is a sense of believing that other people need to change in order for you to be happy. And we can get into the whole thing around how so many of our relationships parallels our childhood dynamics, and how we often play out patterns from our childhood onto our partners. That's a conversation for a different day. But demands happen in relationships, and they are a very tricky thing, my friends. When we fall into the trap of demanding something from the other, in order for us to feel a certain way, we're now putting a lot of power that is ours to own onto somebody else. There is a totally different thing between asking for our needs to be met, which again, my encouragement is to think of that in terms of relational dynamics. Asking for our needs to be met is less about, I'm going to come into this conversation and I'm going to demand that you meet this need, or else I'm going to threaten something about the relationship. I'm going to either withdraw or punish you or whatever. Right? That demand, that energy of, I've made sense of all of this by myself. I figured out what my needs are. Now you have to meet these needs or else we're not going to be good. That type of relating, that type of demanding, that type of placing the other on this pedestal of either they can bestow upon us this thing or we're out, isn't a fair way to be in relationship with another human. But that's often how we are taught to relate to other people. We are taught that we have to make sense of everything by ourselves, and then we have to go in and we have to give a PowerPoint presentation about what it is that we want the other person to do or how we want them to change in order for us to be happy. My invitation here is, when we're talking about asking for our needs to be met, the ask is a conversation between two individuals about our needs, their needs, how we understand their needs, how they understand our needs, where they come from, where we come from, and how we can make sense of this need together. It's a dynamic where we are in exploration of this thing together, because When we go in with a demand, that's putting a lot of pressure and a lot of weight of the relationship onto something that you cannot control. But if you're going into it as a conversation, if you're going into it as an exploration that two people can do together, now you can get a different perspective on things. You can understand yourself more deeply. You can think about things with a little bit more nuance and depth, because now you're thinking about it in terms of this other human and I were co-creating something together. We're co-creating a space where both of our needs can be met and can be attended to and can be held, rather than you do this or else blank. That type of relating does not typically work for sustainable, thriving, long-term relationships, right? So, are we trying to get our needs met, or are we demanding that the other person changes? That's an important question for you to be asking yourself before going into the ask, before going into the conversation. Ideally, you have listened to this episode and you'll have thought about this, and you change your approach, and you think about needs as a relational conversation, as love language. Language requires dialogue and conversating and being in it together. That's what I'm encouraging all of us to do. Okay. Because trying to change a partner into who you think they should be, whether that's you think that they should be because you think that that's the greatest version of them, or who you think they should be in order for you to be happy with them, it's not going to heal your wounds. It's not going to really take away the feelings that you have. I know it's tempting to think that way. I know it's tantalizing to believe that if only our partners could change, then we would be happy. But that's just not how this stuff tends to work. Yes? Okay. So, I'm checking that off of my list here. Okay. So, in order to be thinking about this, the ask, it's important to think about going in it with, well, let me just say it this way. Going into that type of conversation with this is what I need can often elicit obligation, right? Like if you say, hey, I need you to do this, like what do you hear when somebody says that to you? You often think, oh, I now have this like obligation to do this thing. It doesn't elicit this like well-being of like, oh my gosh, this is a need that you've been having, that you've been unhappy with, that you haven't felt has been prioritized. Like, yes, of course, let me support you. No, usually what we hear is, fuck, man, like now I have to do another thing for her, like, and I have to do this other thing. You know, like I don't have the capacity to do that thing. Now it's a whole thing about obligation and power dynamic. And again, I haven't found that to be successful. I haven't found that to really work. Instead, when talking about your needs, focus on why that need is important to you. Focus on what's important. Yeah? So I'm learning that it's important for me that we spend quality time together because it's how I feel loved and connected to you. Can we think together about how we can make that happen? Damn, isn't that so much more different than I need you to stop going out with your friends so much and be with me, right? Like I need you to spend time with me. One elicits curiosity and space and dynamic conversation, and the other one leads to this kind of power dynamic obligation, it feels a little manipulative because it feels like you've had all this time to think about your need and now you're just bulldozing your partner and expecting them to be able to drop everything to suddenly meet this need or else the relationship is in jeopardy. I mean, it just doesn't feel very fair. The nice thing about connecting to what's important and why this need is important to you and what, understanding ambivalence around your needs and really thinking about this is that you're going into the conversation with a vulnerable energy. You're going into this with this open-mindedness of like, how can the two of you think about this thing together? And maybe, your partner will come back with, Going out with my friends is a really important thing for me. It feels really exciting for me to be out there and I get really nourished and supported by it. So it sounds like maybe we have to hold both of these needs together and think about how we want to juggle both of these needs, both, your desire to spend quality time with me and also my desire to be, connecting to my friends. Maybe we can kind of hold this tension together as we navigate and think about how we want to get these needs met. Ooh, doesn't that sound so much sexier than how our conversations usually go? Which is like, well, I don't, feeling obligated, like, oh, great, like now I have to sacrifice time with friends. Like I'm already feeling burnt out. Friends is the only way I know how to decompress, and now I'm not even supposed to be doing that, and then get resentful at your partner because you feel like they're saying that you can't have friends, and then it just becomes this whole train wreck. Yes, going in with what's important about this need and thinking about this need together can help you understand your partner deeper. Maybe it can help you understand, like, by quality time, I think you often mean being home together. And I can't really be at home a lot lately because I work from home and I need to go out. So what if we could spend quality time out in the world together? That may be a way that, I can get out of the house and we can spend time together, right? Conversations, we're making sense of things together, we're coming together with their needs, our needs, and we're dancing in it. That doesn't always mean that there's a solution. It doesn't always mean that you two are going to come up with this perfect idea that's going to work every time. But when you're coming in and they're coming in, thinking about what's important and what they need and what you need, you start to be in this dance together. You start to have to make sense of things together. And that's the whole point of relationship, right? Is this intimacy of understanding each other. Yes? Okay. So one thing that I like to do, and that I invite all of you to do, is yes, focus on what's important, and then also think about this and talk about this together. What do you do in the relationship that makes it hard for your partner to meet your need? Now we're talking about radical self-responsibility, right? Like, what do you do that makes it hard for your partner to meet your need? Let's say you're, having this really dense schedule and your partner doesn't have as much of a dense schedule. And so you've asked your partner, like, could you be responsible for making food for us while my schedule is as intense as it is because I can't do it. And let's say that you have that conversation and your partner says, sure, okay. And then every time your partner makes food, you complain about him. You complain about the food. You don't think it's very good every single time. Do you think that you're now inspiring your partner to continue to help you meet your needs? Right? The answer is no. So when we think about, like, what do you do that makes it hard for your partner to meet your need? And what do they do that makes it hard for you to meet their needs? Again, now you can be in dialogue about the complexities and the ambivalence and the levels and layers that's here around needs. Now you two can be thinking about how you can get out of your own way, right? And get out of your partner's way and helping your partner meet your need. If quality time is important, but the entire time that you spend together, you're, let's say, nitpicking on your partner, that partner is probably not going to want to be spending that much time with you. So these are all things to be thinking about if you are truly committed to getting your needs met. But it's not fair for you to get resentful at your partner for not cooking for you and meeting your need when you complain about their food every time they make it. Yes? So what we're doing here again is we're adding complexity. We're thinking about this together with the person, rather than a demand, an expectation of change in order for us to be happy. Okay? So there is getting to know your own need. Then there's the asking for the need, being in dynamic conversation about that. And then, of course, on the other side of that, there's the potential rejection. There's the potential, I don't know if I can really make that work right now. And rejections are hard, and it can feel really disappointing and really scary, and that's often why we don't ask for our needs to be met. We're so scared of that disappointment. We're so scared of that rejection. But when you're coming in it, help trying to make sense of it with the other person, instead of demanding that they change, the rejection feels a lot less like this power dynamic of them saying no to you. And it generally feels more like a conversation of, like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. Okay, maybe we can think about this differently, or maybe we can strategize about this differently, or maybe you are really overworked right now and can't spend that much time with me, but maybe we plan a vacation. it becomes less about this rejection of like, no, I'm not going to spend quality time with you, right? That usually happens when there's a demand. And instead it just continues to be a way of working through it and figuring it out and being in attention together. And that feels so much more sustainable for my little heart that is so sensitive to rejection and abandonment and disappointment. It feels much better to think about it this way. Rather than like going in guns blazing, this is what I need. And then like just, hoping that they will be able to bow down to you and then you'll be happy in the relationship. We often go into conversations like gun blazing, like very defensive because we're terrified of getting hurt, terrified of the rejection. But the irony is that defensiveness and going in closed and going in with a demand probably it leads more likely to a rejection than going in it with vulnerability and openness and curiosity and trying to make sense of things together. Yes? And if you get rejected, if that's a no, if your friends are like, yeah, I don't want to turn around and go back to the car. I really want to keep going on the hike and you have to go back by yourself and that doesn't feel good. That sucks. Rejection sucks. Disappointment sucks. And they're just other human feelings. They can be held and navigated too. I have a whole episode on disappointments and expectations that you can catch from earlier this season. But these are just human feelings. You can feel disappointed, you can feel rejected, and then maybe even be in the relationship in that too, and say something like, I feel really disappointed by that decision and I respect it, but maybe we can talk about it a little bit more later and like just be in it together, where you can get your needs met and I can also be seen in my disappointment. You don't have to carry everything alone, my love. And this kind of relational way of thinking about things has been life-changing for me. It really allows us to feel more connected to the people in our lives instead of feeling like isolated little silos, having to make sense of everything by ourselves and then putting, then coming into it with perfectly curated thought and then having them reject or accept this perfectly curated thought. It's just, there's something so much richer about just being in it with other humans. And I hope when you're thinking about needs that you're thinking about that as well. How can we be in it with other people? Yes? Wonderful. Well, I hope that this was useful to all of you. I'm sending you all my love. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider sharing it with your community. You can share it on Instagram and tag me my handle is at I am Thaís Sky. Find me on Instagram. I love having conversations there. So much of these conversations are happening there. And you can also review the podcast. I do love a good review. I really, really appreciate it. It does help the algorithms. I know it's silly, but it does. And I really appreciate it. And I thank all of you who have left reviews on iTunes. It really means the world. And I will see you soon.